Okay, so I just finished reading Stranger in a Strange Land, which is considered one of those sci-fi classics, and that's why I wanted to check it out and just see what all the hype was about, so to speak. So it came out in the early 1960s. So first, a few overall thoughts, and then I'll share kind of who I think are the best characters and what's kind of the best feature of this book, the worst feature of this book, and whether it's worth reading ultimately for you or whoever, depending on your preferences also. But okay, so some overall thoughts about Stranger in a Strange Land. It's kind of interesting how it combines 1950s sensibilities with a futuristic scenario. By the way, I'm going to avoid any major spoilers, so you're okay if you don't want spoilers. So we got the 1950s sensibilities in terms of just cultural stuff, but we're also in the future at some point when there's more like space travel and things like that. So I think the reason some people dislike this book is because they look at the 1950s sensibilities and get caught up in that. So different era and all that stuff in terms of gender roles and other things. And then this book, while it's considered a sci-fi book, I find it to be not very sci-fi-ish. It's kind of more philosophical than sci-fi. So there's a lot of like, oh, what happens when you put different cultures together and stuff like that, as opposed to here's some cool technology and some sort of conflict or whatever. The first half of the book was better than the second half. Let's put it that way, because the second half is a little repetitive and kind of drags in some ways because there's a lot of the same types of things just happening a lot in the second half of the book. So those are kind of my overall thoughts. Now I'm going to get into some specifics and then share my kind of final conclusion. So the start of the book, the first line is pretty good. I think it says, once there was a Martian named Michael Valentine Smith. So kind of interesting where we're like, here's this Martian. Who is he? Where is he? What is he doing? Is he on Mars or is he somewhere else? And then the beginning of the book did capture my attention, capture my interest, and kind of pulled me along for a bit. The characters are very mixed. On the one hand, you have probably the coolest character in the book is this guy named Jubal Harshaw, because he's a little old-fashioned, but also seems to have this very holistic view of everything, seems to kind of understand everything and be able to put all the pieces together really quickly. And he has a good sense of humor as well. So all those things together make him probably the coolest character in the book, even though I'm sure there's some people that dislike him for various reasons. The main character, or the Martian guy, the stranger in the strange land, is okay. He's kind of interesting, but not like the most amazing character. There's several one-dimensional characters, like some certain government agents and things like that. And there's a few kind of in-betweeners, but most of the characters are somewhat one-dimensional other than just a very small handful of characters in this book. So what is the best feature of this book? Well, I think the best feature is the premise and in the way that it takes inspiration from the Jungle Book. I guess the author, Robert Heinlein, was inspired by the Jungle Book about a human or whatever growing up. Yeah, it is a human in both cases, I guess. Growing up in a different environment, raised by different creatures. So that happens in both the Jungle Book and this book. And so that the premise is kind of cool. That idea is kind of cool. What is the worst feature of this book? Well, other than the fact that it's not really a sci-fi book, barely qualifies, is that it's basically about the development of a cult. And we get hammered a lot with the author's worldviews, where he kind of dislikes various things about conventional society and things. It would seem that he does feel that way based on the way he wrote this book, even though it's possible that that's not the case. So I think that's kind of the best and the worst. So is it worth reading? I would say it's only worth reading if you're very interested in seeing what some of these older kind of influential sci-fi books are about, or books by influential authors such as Robert A. Heinlein, who wrote this one, and his contemporaries like Asimov and others. If you just want to see what some of their older stuff is like and why people talk about it for better or worse, then check it out. Otherwise, I would say if you're not a hardcore kind of historian of sci-fi, then you could probably just skip it, not worry about it. So those are my overall thoughts about Stranger in a Strange Land.